Good evening, and welcome back to our quiet corner of Edwardian England, where the lamp is already lit and there is a chair kept warm for you. Tonight, we go down into Somerset, to the last golden week of summer in 1909, and to an old brick farmhouse at the end of a lane, where 9 beehives stand along a warm south wall. Their keeper is Hester Sennick, a widow of 50, slow-spoken and unhurried, whose hands smell always of beeswax and wood smoke, and who has told her bees every piece of village news for 33 years. Each autumn, jars of her honey appear on the doorsteps of people who have had a hard season. Nobody sees them come, nobody claims them, and when Hester counts her shelves, the number is never short. So settle down, dim your lamp, and let the garden hum softly outside your window. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. We always love to know, and if you'd like to stay a while, you're very welcome to subscribe. Now, let us begin. The last true week of the summer came to Nether Hembury in the final days of August, in the year 1909, and it came the way such weeks always do, without any announcement and without the least suggestion that it was the last of anything. Hester Sennick knew, though. She had known since Tuesday. It was not a thing she could have proved to anybody. There was nothing in the sky to show it. The mornings still came up gold over the shoulder of the hill, and the hedge banks were still deep and green and full of small hidden traffic, and the heat still stood in the lane by 10 o'clock, like something you could lean against. But the light had changed. It had gone from white to honey. It came in lower now and lay longer, and it had that particular thickness to it that the light gets when the year has stopped climbing and has begun very gently to sit down. And the bees knew. The bees always knew first. She woke at 5, as she had woken at 5 for 30 years, and lay for a moment in the grey, with her eyes open, listening to the house. Combewell was an old house, and it talked to itself a good deal. The thatch shifted and rustled overhead where the sparrows lived. A beam somewhere over the dairy end gave it small, dry crack, the way it had every morning of her married life and every morning since. Below, in the kitchen, the range ticked as it cooled. Beyond that, nothing at all. No cart on the lane, no voice, no dog. Only the enormous soft country silence that people who live in towns describe as peaceful, and people who live in the country do not describe at all, because you cannot describe a thing you have never once been without. She put back the sheet and swung her feet down onto the boards, and the boards were cool, and that was the second sign. She dressed in the half-dark without a candle, a cream linen shirtwaist, worn soft as a cloth by many washings, the sleeves rolled back above the elbow where they would stay until October. A long skirt of dark olive brown, easy through the hips and straight in the way skirts had begun to be cut lately, which Hester approved of on entirely practical grounds and would not have called fashion if you had paid her. And over it all, the heavy pinafore apron of unbleached calico, with a pocket across the front deep enough to hold a hive tool, a ball of string, a pair of scissors, 3 clothes pegs, and, on one memorable occasion, a very cross young blackbird. She pinned up her hair without looking in the glass. It was iron grey now and had been dark brown once, and there was a good deal of it still. She wound it into a plain low bun at the nape and pushed in 3 pins, and that was that. She had never in her life owned a curling iron, Her daughter Clemency had bought her a tortoise-shell comb one Christmas, a lovely thing, and Hester had thanked her warmly and put it in a drawer where it remained in perfect condition to this day. Downstairs, she raked the range through and fed it and set the kettle on, and while it thought about boiling, she went to the back door and opened it and stood in the doorway with her arms folded, looking out at the garden. This was the best 10 minutes of her day, and she had never told anyone about it because she suspected it would sound like very little. The garden ran away from the house for the better part of an acre, walled all round in old brick that had gone the colour of a fox in the sun. There was a flagged path down the middle, and on either side of it the whole cheerful disorder of the end of summer. Lavender going grey-blue and dusty, marjoram in flower, a great riot of barrage that had seeded itself where it liked and been allowed to, hollyhocks leaning tiredly against the wall, and beyond them the vegetable rows, and beyond those the apple trees, with the fruit hanging down heavy and streaked and not quite ready. And at the far end, along the south wall, where the brick held the sun until 9 at night, stood the bee house. It was not a house, and never had been. It was a stone alcove, 3 walls, and a slate roof, built by somebody 100 years ago who had understood that bees like their backs to the weather and their faces to the sun. Inside it stood the hives, 5 white-painted double-walled ones with their gabled roofs, and beside them, at the shady end, 4 old straw skeps, domed and shaggy, which nobody in England had seriously kept bees in for 30 years, and which Hester kept because Marianne Tuckfield had kept them, and because they looked right. Even from the doorway, 60 yards off, she could hear them. That was the sound. That was the one she had woken up wanting. A low, steady, unhurried hum, not loud, not near, a sound that seemed to come out of the ground rather than out of any one place. The sound of a great many small lives, all getting on with a great deal of work, and not one of them in any hurry at all. It was the sound the garden made when the garden was well. Hester stood and listened to it for a while. Right then, she said. She took her tea down the path at 5:30. She did this every morning. She carried the cup in one hand and walked slowly, because you did not go quickly near the hives. Not out of fear, but out of manners. The same way you do not slam a door in a house where somebody is sleeping. The dew was heavy. It came through the top of her boots by the 3rd flagstone, as it always did, and she had long ago stopped minding. At the bee house, she set the cup down on the flat stone that had held her cup and Marianne's cup before her, and she went along the row. She knew them all, and they were all quite different, and anybody who told her that a colony of bees had no character had simply never kept 9 of them. The first hive was steady and even, and had been steady and even for 6 years. She laid her hand flat on the roof. The wood was warm, not sun-warm, for the sun was not yet over the wall, but warm from the inside, the way the flank of a sleeping animal is warm, and under her palm she could feel the faint, deep vibration of 40,000 bees keeping house in the dark. The second was a strong hive, and a slightly bad-tempered one, and she moved a little more carefully. The third had swarmed in May and gone thin, and built itself back up through June with such stubborn determination that Hester had developed a private and entirely unreasonable partiality for it. The 4th was the great one. The 4th had been the great one for 2 years now, and it would be heavy this year, and she knew it. The 5th was young and small, and had been made from the May swarm, and would take nothing at all this season, and would want feeding well in September. And then the 4 skeps, which held nothing but memory, and which she touched anyway. She stood at the end of the row with her tea, and watched the first foragers come out into the cold air and turn and go, one after another, up over the wall and away east toward the heather on the hill. "It's the week," she told them. She said it quite naturally, the way you would say it to somebody standing beside you. "It's the week, and I'm sorry, and you know I'll leave you plenty." She had been talking to the bees since she was 17 years old. It was not a private eccentricity. In that part of Somerset in that year, it was still a thing a good many people did, and a good many more remembered their mothers doing, though fewer would have admitted it in front of a stranger. When somebody in the house was born, you told the bees. When somebody married, you told the bees. When somebody died, you went down the garden in your black and put a scrap of crepe on the hives, and you told them, quietly, name and all, and you asked them to stay. Old Marianne Tuckfield had told Hester at 17 that a hive left untold would dwindle and go, and had said it in exactly the same tone in which she said that you must not put a hot lid on a cold jar, and Hester had absorbed both pieces of information in the same way, and had never once seen fit to separate them. She had told these hives about Edwin. She had gone down the path on the second morning, 12 years ago, in a black dress that did not fit her properly, and she had stood at the bee house and put her hand on every roof in turn, and said his name and told them he was gone, and had asked them, in a voice that would not do what she wanted it to stay. They had stayed. Hester had never worked out what she thought about that, and had reached the conclusion, somewhere in her 40s, that she did not have to. Prudence Chidgey came up the lane at 7, with her sleeves already rolled. She was 17, the 4th of 6, and she came up to Combewell 3 or 4 days a week through the summer, and got paid in coin and honey and instruction in roughly equal measure. She was quick and cheerful, and asked a great many questions, most of them good ones, and she had the enormous advantage over almost everyone else in the village of being entirely unbothered by bees. She had been stung on the wrist in her first week, had said, "Oh," in a mildly interested way, and had carried on. "Is it today, then?" she said, coming through the gate. "It's today." I told Mother it'd be today. Prudence tied her apron on with a snap. "She said you'd leave it till September, like last year, and I said no. Look at the light." Hester, who had spent 8 days privately watching the light and had told nobody, gave the girl a long, thoughtful look. "You'll do," she said. They worked all that morning. It was hot by 9 and blazing by 11, and that was exactly right. Bees are amiable in the heat and disagreeable in the damp, and the frames come out cleanly when it is warm. Hester lit the smoker with a twist of rotten sacking and a match, and worked the bellows until the thin white smoke came steady and cool, and set her wide straw hat on, with the black net veil gathered and tucked down inside her collar. She did not wear gloves. She had not worn gloves since she was 30. You cannot feel what you are doing in gloves, and if you cannot feel what you are doing, you are clumsy. And if you are clumsy, you crush bees, and a crushed bee sets off every other bee in the hive. Prudence wore the spare veil and a pair of Edwin's old leather gauntlets, which came halfway to her elbows and made her look, as Hester observed, like a small, determined blacksmith. They took the fourth hive first because it was the heaviest. There was a rhythm to it that Hester could have done in her sleep, and rather thought she sometimes did. A puff of smoke at the entrance, a count of 30, while the bees inside filled themselves with honey and forgot to be interested in you. Lift the roof, set it upside down on the grass. Lift the crown board gently, prizing with the flat steel hive tool, the propolis giving with that small, satisfying crack. A little more smoke drifting down over the tops of the frames, and the bees going down between them like water, and then the frames themselves, one at a time, lifted straight up and out into the daylight. The first came out heavy. Hester held it level in both hands and turned it slowly into the sun, and the light came through the wax, and it was, every year it was, quite absurdly beautiful. The whole face of the comb was sealed over with new white cappings, pale and matte as fresh cream, and where the light struck it edge on, you could see the depth of the honey lying behind, gold going into amber, going into brown at the shoulders where the older stores were. It was heavier than it had any right to be, 8 or 9 pounds of it in a frame you could hold in one hand. "There," said Hester. "That's a good one, isn't it?" said Prudence, coming to look. "That's heather coming in on the top of the clover. You'll not get better than that anywhere in the county." She brushed a dozen bees off it with a goose quill, unhurried, and slid it into the covered crate. "Mine now. Next." They took 11 frames off the fourth hive, and 8 off the second, and 6 off the first. And after some deliberation, 4 off the third, and nothing at all off the fifth. At each hive, she stopped when she came to the point where she judged there was enough left, and there was always a point at which Prudence would have gone on, and Hester stopped. "There's another 2 there easy," said Prudence at the second hive. "There is? Well then." "They've a winter to get through," said Hester, "and I've not." She put the crown board back and settled it with the flat of her hand. "You take what's spare. You don't take what's needed. That's the whole of it, and if you can hold that in your head, you'll keep bees till you're 80. Prudence considered this with the seriousness of 17. "Mrs. Gaylard says you leave more than anyone in the parish. Mrs. Gaylard says a good deal. She says that's why yours never die out in the winter." Hester picked up the smoker and did not answer that, and after a moment they carried the crates up to the house. The afternoon was the scullery, and the scullery was hot and sticky and long, and in its own way entirely delightful. The extractor stood in the middle of the flagged floor, a great tinned drum with a handle at the top, in which 2 frames could be spun at once so that the honey flew out of the comb and ran down the inside and gathered in the bottom. It had been Marianne's, and it was 30 years old, and it made a noise like a very slow train. First, the cappings. Hester stood at the table with a long knife warmed in a jug of hot water and shaved the white wax seal off each face of the comb in one long, slow stroke, and the wax came away in a sheet and fell into the bowl, and underneath it the honey stood up bright and immediately began to run. Then the spinning. Prudence turned the handle, slowly at first and then faster, and the honey came off the combs and struck the inside of the drum with a sound like fine rain, and the smell came up out of it and filled the whole back of the house. Not the smell of honey in a jar, which is sweet, but the smell of honey in the comb, which is warm and floral and faintly resinous, and does something to the back of your throat that no jar has ever managed. Then the straining. The tap at the bottom of the drum opened into a pail, and the pail went up onto the frame where the great muslin bag hung, and the honey went into the muslin. And then, over the next 12 hours, came slowly and patiently through it, one unhurried amber thread, dropping into the earthenware bowl below. That was the part Hester liked best, and it was the part that could not be hurried at all. You could not squeeze the muslin. If you squeezed the muslin, you got wax and pollen and bee legs and a cloudy jar. And a cloudy jar would set hard and grainy by Christmas. You hung it up and you let it be, and you went to bed, and in the morning it was done. They finished at 7. Prudence went off down the lane with a comb of honey wrapped in a cabbage leaf and a shilling and a great deal of satisfaction. And Hester stood in the doorway and watched her go, and then went in and washed her arms to the elbow in cold water and put the kettle on for the 4th time that day. She ate her supper by the window, bread and cheese and a tomato out of the frame, and tea. She read 4 pages of a book and did not take in one word of them, which is a thing that happens after a day of physical work, and put it down without minding. And at 9, when the light had gone long and red and the swallows were high, she went down the path again. The bees were quiet now. There was a little fanning at the entrances, cooling the hives after the heat of the day, and the low hum was there, but softer, drowsy, settling. She went along the row and put her hand on each roof. "That's done then," she said, "and I left you the 4th and near all of the 5th, and there's the ivy still to come. So don't you tell me I've robbed you." The wood was warm under her palm. She stood there for a while with the smell of lavender coming up off the path, and the last of the sun going off the top of the wall. And she thought about nothing very much, which was, she had found, the point of standing there. She strained the honey off at 6 the next morning and jarred it through the day, and it was Friday, and Silas Bidgood's cart went down the lane at 11 with the sound it always made, and by 4 in the afternoon it was finished. The last job was the larder. The larder at Combewell was the coldest room in Somerset. It was on the north side, with walls 2 feet thick and one small high window with a wire screen over it, and a slate shelf running the whole length of the far wall that had been quarried and set there before anybody's grandmother. In August, when the rest of the house was too hot to sit down in, you went into the larder and the cold came at you off the stone like the door of an ice house. She carried the jars in 6 at a time. She set them along the slate in rows, and as she set them, the light from the high window came through and lit them all the way down. Pale straw at the near end where the early clover was, then deeper, then the true gold of the midsummer, then at the far end the dark red amber of the heather off the hill, thick enough that you could turn the jar upside down and count to 3 before anything moved, each one covered with its disc of waxed paper, tied down with string, the knots all facing the same way, because that was how Marianne had done it, and Hester had never seen a reason to alter it. When they were all in, she stood back and counted them. She counted twice, the way she always did, and got the same number both times. Then she took the little notebook out of her apron pocket. It was a small thing with a brown paper cover, gone soft and furred at the corners, and it had been in that pocket or its predecessor for as long as she had been keeping bees on her own account. The last 20 pages of it were nothing but figures. A year, a number, sometimes a word or two, wet June, or swarmed twice, or heather good. Nothing more than that. She had never seen the point of writing more than that. She licked the stub of pencil, which is a thing everybody did, and nobody has ever explained. And she wrote the year and the number. And then she stood there in the cold larder with the pencil in her hand and looked at what she had written for a good deal longer than a number requires, because there was a thing about the number. It was not the wrong number. That was not it. The number was exactly right. She had counted twice, and it was exactly what she had carried in, and there was nothing whatever the matter with it. She had jarred what she had strained, and she had strained what she had spun, and she had spun what she had taken, and it all agreed. It was only that in October, when the year came round to it, she would come into this larder and count these shelves again. And in the meantime, through September and into October, jars of Combewell honey would find their way onto doorsteps up and down that lane. She knew they would. They had done it every autumn for, she found, standing there, that she did not immediately know how many. A good many. On the step of a house where a woman had been widowed, or where the cow had gone down, or where a man had come off a ladder in the spring and not worked since. Wrapped in newspaper. No note. No name. Nobody ever saw them come, and nobody ever asked her, because everybody in Nether Hembury assumed, quite reasonably, that it was Hester Sennick, and Hester Sennick was not the sort of woman you embarrassed by mentioning a thing like that out loud. And it was not Hester Sennick. She had never once carried a jar down that lane in her life. And in October, when she came in here and counted the shelves again, the number would be exactly what she had just written in the back of this notebook. It would not be short. It had never been short. Not once. Not by one jar. In all the years she had been standing in this cold little room, with a pencil in her hand, pretending not to think about it. Hester Sennick looked at the shelf and at all that quiet amber light standing along it, and she found that her heart was going a little faster than the occasion called for. Then she closed the notebook and put it in her apron pocket and pulled the larder door to behind her and went out into the warm kitchen to put the kettle on. There was, after all, no hurry. The bees had taught her that, if they had taught her nothing else, things that are worth understanding take a season or 2 seasons or 33 years, and they do not come any faster for being chased, and they very often come of their own accord if you simply go on doing the work in front of you and leave the door on the latch. Outside, the light went from gold to rose to that deep blue that comes up out of the grass rather than down out of the sky. And the swallows came lower, and away at the end of the garden, in the stone alcove along the south wall, 9 hives settled themselves down into the dark and hummed. September came in quietly at Nether Hembury, the way it does in a good year, without any fuss about it. The heat went out of the middle of the day, but stayed in the walls. The light kept its gold, but stopped standing directly overhead, so that everything in the garden acquired a long, soft shadow at 4 in the afternoon that it had not had a fortnight before. The swallows were still there, and would be for 3 weeks yet, but they had begun to gather along the telegraph wire down by the crossroads in the evenings, 20 and 30 at a time, having their long, complicated conversation about the journey. And the mornings changed. That was the great alteration. Hester came out of the back door at 5:30 now, and found the whole combe below the house filled to the brim with white mist, level as milk in a bowl, with the tops of the elms standing up out of it, and the church tower away to the left, with its weathercock just catching the first of the sun. By 8, it would be gone. By 5:30 the next morning, it would be back. It came up out of the wet grass every night of September, like something exhaled. She stood in the doorway with her tea and watched it, and thought, as she thought every year at about this time, that if she had to choose one single fortnight out of the whole 12 months to keep and let all the rest go, she would very likely choose this one. The bees were quieter now, not silent, never silent. But the great, deep working roar of August had gone out of them, and what was left was lower and slower and more contemplative. There was ivy coming. The ivy on the church wall and along the top of the lane would be in flower by the last week of the month, and there was a great deal of it, and it was the last honey of the year and the one that got them through. And until it opened, the bees had rather less to do, and did it rather less urgently. The ones that were out and about were the old ones, mostly. Hester could tell them at a glance now, after 33 years. A summer bee lives 6 weeks and works herself to death in the doing of it. And by September, the ones you see at the entrance are worn thin, their wings ragged at the edges, the fur rubbed off their thoraxes so that they go about shiny and dark and rather bald, like small elderly gentlemen in good but very old coats. She had a soft spot for them, she always had. Emmeline Gaylard came to the wall on the 2nd morning of the month, as she did most mornings, and leaned on it. She was 71, and she lived in the cottage below Combewell, and the wall between the two gardens was the exact height for leaning on if you were Emmeline Gaylard and had been leaning on it for 40 years. She had a sharp brown face like a bird's, and very little patience with foolishness, and a great deal of kindness, which she distributed in a manner so brisk that people occasionally failed to notice it had happened. "You've done your honey then? Friday week." I saw the girl going down with a comb the size of a hymn book. Emmeline sniffed. Her mother will have had half of it. Her mother's welcome to it. Her mother's got 6 children and no more sense than a hen, and I'll thank you not to tell her I said so. Emmeline settled her elbows more comfortably on the coping stone. I had my money Tuesday. Did you now? 5 shillings. That's what it was last Tuesday, Emmeline. And it'll be 5 shillings next Tuesday, and I'll tell you about it then too, said Emmeline Gaylard with enormous satisfaction. 71 years old, and the government of this country sends me 5 shillings a week for doing absolutely nothing at all. My mother died at 63, scrubbing other people's floors. If I want to mention it twice a week for the rest of my natural life, I shall consider that restraint. Hester laughed. It was a good laugh, low and unhurried, and it came up from somewhere below her ribs. Fair enough. It is fair enough. Emmeline looked out over the garden with her sharp eye. Your borage has gone everywhere. It has. You'll never be rid of it now. I don't want to be rid of it. The bees are on it till the frost. That's what you said about the marjoram. Emmeline straightened up and dusted her forearms. I'm going down the lane. Do you want anything? No, thank you. You never do, said Emmeline, and went. The village was small enough to be got round in 20 minutes, and complicated enough to take a lifetime, which is the case with all villages and always has been. There were, in the parish of Nether Hembury, in the September of 1909, something under 300 souls. There was the church with its grey tower and its ring of 5 bells, one of which had been cracked since 1874 and was rung anyway. There was the school with 41 children in one room and a stove that smoked when the wind was in the east. There was the forge and the shop that was really somebody's front parlour, and the bell and the vicarage, which had the only telephone for 4 miles, an instrument regarded locally with the polite suspicion due to any device that allows a person to be spoken to without warning. There was one lane through, and a great many tracks off it, and above and behind everything, the long green shoulder of the hill with the heather on top. Hester had been born in the next parish, and had come to Combewell at 22 as a bride, and had therefore been living in Nether Hembury for 28 years, which meant that she was very nearly local and would be entirely local in another 30 or so. Silas Bidgood's cart came up the lane on the Friday at 11, as it had come up the lane at 11 on a Friday for as long as anyone could recall. He was 63, and he made cider, and he carried for the whole parish, down to the market town on Friday morning, with whatever anyone wanted taken, and back up at 11 with whatever anyone wanted brought. He had a fat grey mare called Dorothy, and a cart with a canvas hood, and an arrangement of ropes and pegs that no one else had ever understood, and that had never once failed. He pulled up at the Combewell gate and did not get down. Morning. Morning, Silas. 2 sacks of sugar. He jerked his head at the back of the cart. And your seed order. That's quick. It come in Wednesday. He looked at the sky and then at the hedge, and then briefly at Hester. You'll be feeding then. End of the month. Aye. He chewed nothing for a moment. Wet October coming. Is there? There is. He gave the reins a twitch, and Dorothy leaned into the collar, and the cart began to move. Slows are early. And that was the whole of the conversation, and it was, by Silas Bidgood's standards, garrulous. Hester carried the sugar in, 2 sacks, 56 pounds apiece, and she took them one at a time on her shoulder from the gate to the scullery. And she was 50 years old, and she did not have to stop, and she was aware, setting the second one down, of a small and entirely unrespectable satisfaction about that. The sugar was for the 5th hive, and for the 3rd, and for whichever else looked light when she hefted them at the end of the month. Syrup made 2 pounds to the pint, fed slowly through the last week of September and the 1st of October, so that the bees could take it down and store it and cap it before the cold came. It was not honey, and it never would be, but it was warmth in January, and Hester had never yet lost a colony to starvation and did not intend to begin. The letter from Clemency came on the Tuesday. It came in the 2nd post, which was the 2 o'clock, and Hester heard the gate and knew what it was before she reached it, because it came every other Tuesday and had done since Clemency married and went to Bristol 4 years ago. She did not open it in the hall. She never opened it in the hall. She put the kettle on and made the tea and sat down at the kitchen table by the window with the cup at her elbow, and then she opened it. 4 pages, both sides, in a round, upright hand. The lodgers on the second floor had gone, and better ones had come. Frederick's firm had taken a new contract at the docks, and he was pleased about it and had said so twice, which for Frederick was a public celebration. There had been a fog on the river for 3 days that got into everything, including, Clemency was fairly certain, the bread. Little Edwin had cut a tooth and was extremely pleased with it and showed it to everybody, including the milkman. And Mother, he has your way of looking at a thing. Frederick says it is unnerving in a person of 14 months. He gets hold of something, a spoon or the cat's tail, God help the cat, and he simply looks at it for whole minutes together, as though he means to get to the bottom of it before he lets go. I said to Frederick, "That is my mother, exactly." And Frederick said in that case he pities the cat. Hester read it twice. She always read it twice. The second time she read it slowly, and by the time she got to the end of the second reading, her tea had gone cold, which was the usual outcome, and which she had long ago accepted as the price of the thing. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer of the dresser with the others. There were 4 years of them in there now, tied in bundles of a dozen with garden string. And she got out paper and the inkstand, and she answered it the same evening, as she always did. She wrote about the honey harvest and about Prudence Chidgey, who Clemency had been at school with and thought very highly of. She wrote that Mrs. Gaylard had had her pension again and was still telling everybody. She wrote that Silas Bidgood had forecast a wet October on the evidence of the sloes, and that she had put 2 shillings on it, mentally, at Evans. She did not write that the 5th hive was small, because Clemency would worry. She did not write about the larder. Later, and it was much later, past 9, with the lamp lit and the range banked down. She took the letter out again and read the last page a 3rd time, and then sat for a while with her hand flat on the table beside it. Then she got up and took the lamp and went out through the scullery and down the garden path in the dark. The night was cool and completely still. There was a moon somewhere behind the elms, not up yet, but the sky had that faint pearl to it that comes before it. The path was pale under her feet. The lavender had gone over now, but still smelled of itself when her skirt brushed it. At the bee house, she set the lamp down on the flat stone and went along the row. "Right," she said. "News from Bristol." She put her hand on the first roof. The wood was cool on top now, at night, in September. But underneath, when you pressed, there was still that deep, faint warmth of 40,000 small bodies packed in the dark. And beneath her palm, the low, continuous hum went on, unchanged, indifferent, entirely occupied. "The boy's cut a tooth. Bottom left," she says. "He's 14 months, and he's got a tooth, and he's showing it to the milkman." She moved along. "Frederick's got his contract. He's pleased. He said so twice, which, for Frederick..." She stopped, because there is a limit to how much you can explain your son-in-law to a beehive, and moved on again. And there was fog on the river 3 days together, and it got in the bread. That's the whole of it. That's all the news there is. At the fourth hive, she stayed a little longer. He looks at things, she said. The boy. He gets hold of a thing and he looks at it. She says it's my way. She was quiet a moment. Well, he got it from somewhere. The hum went on under her hand. She would not have been able to tell anyone why she did this. She had tried once, at about 30, to explain it to Edwin, who had been an entirely sensible man with no superstition in him whatever, and had got about 4 sentences in before she gave up. He had not laughed at her. That was the thing about Edwin. He had listened to the whole of it and thought about it, and then said, "Well, they're yours, and you talk to me all day, and I'm no better at listening," and gone back to his boots. And that had been that, for 26 years. She had told them when Clemency was born. She had told them when Clemency married, and there had been a piece of the wedding cake left in a saucer on the flat stone all night. Because Marianne had said you did that, and Hester was not going to be the one to stop. She had told them about Edwin. She had told them about her mother and about Marianne herself, the winter of 1888, standing out here in the snow at 7 in the morning, with her hand on cold wood, 29 years old, and quite unable to say the words properly the first time, and having to start again. And they had stayed. Every time they had stayed. Hester picked up the lamp. "Good night then," she said, and went up the path to the house. The first jar appeared on the Thursday. She did not see it. She never saw them. She heard about it, which was the way one heard about everything in Nether Hembury, and she heard about it from Emmeline Gaylard at the wall on Friday morning. You'll have heard about Annie Loveridge. I heard she'd been poorly. Poorly. Emmeline arranged her elbows. She's been in bed a fortnight, and that great useless lump of a brother of hers has been doing the milking and doing it badly. She was out in the yard Tuesday, which she'd no business to be, and she come over faint, and Mrs. Chidgey found her sitting on the mounting block like a sack of meal. Is she up now? She's up. She's up and she's mending, and she's about as much use as a wet Sunday, but she's up. Emmeline paused, and her sharp brown eye came round. There was a jar on her step Thursday morning. Hester went on, tying up the hollyhock that had come away from the wall. Was there? Wrapped in newspaper, set right in the corner by the scraper where she'd see it, and the dog wouldn't. Emmeline waited. Hester tied the knot. Heather, by the look of it, dark as a chestnut. That'll be from the hill. I dare say it will. There was a longish silence of a companionable kind. Well, said Emmeline at last, I'm sure I don't know who'd do such a thing. No, said Hester, nor do I. Emmeline gave her a look that would have gone straight through a plank, and Hester tied up the next hollyhock. And after a moment, Emmeline made a small noise that in a less dignified woman would have been a laugh, and went off down the lane. Hester finished the hollyhocks. Then she went into the house and through the kitchen and opened the larder door. The cold came out at her off the stone. She stood in the doorway with her hand on the jamb and looked down the length of the slate shelf at all that quiet standing amber, pale at the near end, going dark at the far, every jar with its waxed paper cap and its string tied with the knot facing outward. She did not go in. She counted from the door, along the rows, twice, the way she always did. The number was right. It was exactly right. It was to the jar what she had written in the back of the notebook a fortnight ago in this same doorway with the pencil in her hand. Nothing had gone out of that larder. Nothing could have gone out of that larder. The door had been shut and the window was 6 inches by 10 and had a wire screen nailed over it that had been nailed there before the war with the Boers. And somewhere down the lane, in the corner of a doorstep by a boot scraper, out of the way of the dog, there was a jar of Combewell heather honey wrapped in newspaper that Hester Sennick had not put there. She stood in the doorway a good while. Then she shut the door quietly and put the kettle on and got out the flour and the lard and made a batch of scones because her hands wanted something to do and it was Friday anyway. She thought about it that evening, sitting by the range with the lamp turned low and the mending in her lap and not one stitch put in for 20 minutes. She was not frightened. She wanted that clear in her own mind, and she turned it over carefully to be sure of it, the way she checked a frame in the sun. There was no fear in it anywhere. There was nothing in this that felt wrong, nothing that made her want to look over her shoulder or lock a door that had not been locked in 28 years. What she felt was something much stranger and a good deal older, and it took her most of that evening to get anywhere near a word for it. It was the way you feel when you come down in the morning and find the fire already lit. She thought about the years. That was the part she had always, quite deliberately, not done. She had let it sit at the edge of her attention every autumn, for she made herself count now, honestly, on the fingers of one hand and then the other. It had started before Edwin died. She was almost sure of that. There had been a jar on the step at the Snooks the year the barn went, and that was 94, and Edwin had said something about it at supper, something easy and unbothered. Somebody's been at your shelf, girl, and she had said she hadn't counted lately, which had been a lie, because she had counted that morning, and it had been right. 15 years. More. And in all that time, she had never once asked a single question about it out loud. Not of Emmeline, who would have told her everything she knew, and a good deal she didn't. Not of Silas, who knew everything in the parish, and would not have told her anything at all. Not of the vicar, who would have been embarrassed, or of Miss Vellicott, who would have wanted to look it up. She had let it alone. And now, sitting by the range at 50 years of age with a stocking in her lap and the lamp turned low, Hester Sennick asked herself, for the first time, plainly, why. The answer came back rather quicker than she was ready for, because she had not wanted to be told it was nothing, because there was every chance in the world that it was Silas Bidgood with a key he'd had cut in 1893, or Prudence Chidgey's mother, or Emmeline Gaylard herself doing her charity in the brisk, sideways manner in which Emmeline Gaylard did everything. And because the moment somebody told her which of these it was, the whole quiet, extraordinary fact of it would fold up small and become a piece of village business. And she would have to be grateful to somebody, and they would have to be embarrassed about it, and it would be over. Whereas at present, it was not over. At present, every autumn, some part of the world went round the houses of Nether Hembury on her behalf and gave away her honey to people who needed it, and gave back exactly as much as it took, and asked her for nothing, and never once said who it was. Hester looked into the red eye of the range for a while. "That's not a very good reason," she said aloud to the kitchen. The kitchen did not argue. She put the mending down and went out through the scullery and down the path in the dark without the lamp, because there was a moon now, and she knew every flagstone by the feel of it. The mist was already beginning in the low ground below the wall. The air smelled of cold grass and the last of the marjoram. Away over the hill, something, an owl most likely, made one short remark and did not repeat it. At the bee house, she stood at the end of the row and put her hand flat on the roof of the fourth hive, and under the wood the deep, faint hum went on, patient and enormous and entirely uninterested in her. "There was a jar on Annie Loveridge's step," said Hester Sennick to her bees. She waited. "And the shelf's not short." The hum went on. "It's never once been short," she said. "Not in 15 year. And I've never asked. And I'm 50 this March gone. And I'd like to know before I'm done. And I'm ashamed to say I'd like it a good deal." She stood there with her hand on the warm roof for a long moment, in the dark, in the mist coming up, with the whole quiet garden going down into sleep around her. "Well," she said at last, "you'll not tell me either." And she went in and turned down the lamp and went to bed and slept extremely well, as she always did, because whatever else the day had held, she had done a fair day's work in it. The rain came in on the 20th of September and stayed 9 days. It was not a storm. There was nothing dramatic about it at all, and Hester, who had seen a good many Septembers, recognized it within an hour of its arrival as the other kind. The low, grey, patient, unhurried kind that comes up the combe from the southwest and settles in like a relative. It did not lash. It did not blow. It simply rained, quietly and continuously, on the thatch and the flagstones and the apple trees and the bee house and the long green shoulder of the hill, from Monday morning until the following Tuesday afternoon, with 3 brief intermissions on the Thursday, during which nobody was fooled. Silas Bidgood, going by in the cart on the Friday, with the canvas hood up and his hat running, said only, "Slows," and did not stop, and Hester conceded him the 2 shillings in her head. The bees stopped flying. That was the thing that mattered. Bees will fly in a good deal, but they will not fly in cold, steady rain, and by the 2nd day, the entrances of all 9 hives were quiet, with only the occasional bad-tempered guard standing just inside the doorway, looking out at the weather like a woman watching a wet washing line. The great ivy on the church wall and along the top of the lane had come into flower on the 18th, the last honey of the year, the one that carried them through. And now it stood out there in the rain, with its round green cream heads dripping, and nobody at all going to it. Hester minded that more than she minded anything else about the week. 9 days of ivy gone, she said to nobody on the Wednesday, looking down the garden through the scullery window. There was nothing at all to be done about it. That was one of the things 33 years of bees had taught her, and taught her thoroughly. That the great majority of what happened to a colony was weather, and that weather was not a thing you argued with. You did the part that was yours. You made the syrup and you fed it, and you strapped the roofs down and you left them enough. And then the sky did whatever the sky had in mind, and you found out in March how it had gone. So she made the syrup. It filled 2 days and a good deal of the scullery. the great preserving pan on the range, 2 pounds of sugar to the pint of water, brought up slowly and stirred until it went clear, and then off and cooling, and then into the feeders. She fed the 5th hive first, because it was the small one, and then the 3rd, and then she went along the row with her hands under each hive in turn, lifting the back an inch to feel the weight, which is a thing you cannot learn out of a book and cannot ever quite explain afterwards, and gave a feeder to the 2 that came up lighter than she liked. She did it in the rain, in Edwin's old oilskin cape, which came down past her knees and smelled of tar and 20 years. And then, on the Thursday, with the syrup fed and the sugar sacks empty and the rain going on, and the garden a sodden green nothing beyond the glass, Hester Sennick ran out of outdoor work. This happened perhaps 4 times a year, and she never entirely knew what to do about it. She cleaned the scullery, which did not need it. She turned out the linen press. She sat down at 11 in the morning with a book and read 9 pages and put it down. She looked at the mending basket and thought about it and did not. And at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, chiefly because it was the last remaining thing in the house that could be said to constitute a job, she pulled the kitchen table out from the wall, got a candle, and began to turn out the dresser. The dresser at Combewell was 7 feet high and had been in that kitchen since before the house had the range in it. The top half held the blue and white china. The bottom half held 3 deep drawers and 2 cupboards, and the cupboards held, as far as Hester had ever been able to establish, everything that had ever come into the house and had not been either eaten or thrown away. She worked through it methodically, on her knees, with the candle set on the floor beside her because the light was so poor. A stone hot water bottle with a chip out of the neck, 2 flat irons, a biscuit tin of buttons, a bundle of seed packets going back years, most of them empty and kept for the pictures, a wooden box of Edwin's tools, oiled, that she oiled again every spring for no reason she could have defended, a quantity of brown paper, string, more string, a quite extraordinary amount of string, and at the very back of the lower cupboard, behind the brown paper, flat against the boards, a tin box about the size of a large book. She knew it at once, and was aware, taking hold of it, that she had known perfectly well it was there, and had not opened it in a great many years. It had been Marianne's. She sat back on her heels with it in her lap. It was a plain japanned tin, black once, gone brown at the corners where the paint had worn, with a lid that had never fitted well and did not fit now. There was a good deal of dust on it, and when she turned it over, the marks where mice had been interested in it at some point and had given it up. Hester carried it to the table and set it down and lit the lamp, though it was only 3 in the afternoon, because the rain had put the whole kitchen into a kind of green, underwater dusk. Then she opened it. Inside, there was a good deal less than she had expected, which is the case with all such boxes. A pair of steel-rimmed spectacles, with one arm mended with wire. A goose quill, dried and brittle, of the sort you brush bees off a comb with. A flat hive tool, older and thicker and heavier than Hester's own, worn concave at the working end by 50 years of prizing. A twist of paper containing a few seeds that were now certainly dead. A tortoise-shell hairpin, and at the bottom, lying flat, a notebook. It was a small one, about 6 inches by 4, bound in limp brown board with a strip of dark cloth down the spine. The corners were rubbed round. When Hester picked it up, it fell open of itself at a place about 2/3 through, in the way old books do, and the smell that came off the paper was the particular smell of paper that has been shut up in a tin in a cupboard for 20 years. Dry, faintly sweet, a little like tobacco. She turned to the front. The first page had a year on it, and the year was 1856. Hester sat down. It was the same book. That was the first thing. It was, in every particular that mattered, the same book she carried in her apron pocket at that moment. The same size, the same rubbed corners, and inside, on page after page, the same short lines of figures in the same shape. A year, a number, sometimes a word or two. She turned the pages slowly with the flat of her hand. The hand was not hers. It was a slanted, upright, old-fashioned hand in brown ink, the letters small and very even, the loops economical, the hand of somebody who had been taught to write in about 1840 by a person with a ruler. But the habit was hers. It was hers exactly. Year, number, and now and then a remark of the most severe brevity. Wet June, swarmed thrice, tiresome, heather good, heather none, hard winter, lost two, and once, in 1871, with no further comment whatever, the single word ruinous. Hester turned the pages and read 50 years of another woman's bees. She found the year Marianne's husband died, because there was a gap in the numbers, 2 seasons where the figure was 1/3 of what it should have been, and then a slow climb back. She found a run of 4 extraordinary years in the middle 60s. She found the season Marianne had evidently given up on skeps and gone over to frames, because the numbers jumped and stayed jumped. And she found, near the back, in a hand grown shakier, the year 1888, with a number beside it, and after the number, the words, HS taking over. Will do very well. Hester put the book down on the table and looked at it for a moment, and then got up and went to the range and moved the kettle onto the hot plate, although she did not want tea, and then came back and sat down again. Well, she said aloud to the kitchen, thank you. She picked the book up again, and it was then that the loose paper fell out. It came out from between 2 leaves near the back and dropped onto the table. A single sheet, folded twice, soft as cloth at the folds, gone the colour of weak tea. Hester unfolded it carefully, because paper of that age will part along a crease if you are careless with it. It was a list. There were perhaps 30 lines on it in the same slanted brown ink hand, and every line had the same shape, a year and then a name, and then, in 1 or 2 cases, a word or 2 more. She read down it without at first taking any of it in, and then again more slowly. The names were never Hembury names. Some of them she knew as living people. More of them she knew as gravestones. A few she did not know at all. Gaylard. There were 2 Gaylards. Chidgey, 3 of those, and the earliest of them 1859. Snook. Loveridge, twice, and one of them 1866. Bidgood, once, in 1874. Vellacott. A Percy, which had made her look twice, before she remembered that Percys had been thick on the ground in this parish for a century, and that Clemency had married one from Bristol, who was very likely a great-nephew of somebody on this page. And beside 4 or 5 of the names, a note of the same terrible brevity as the weather remarks. Fever. The barn. Widowed, 5 children. Leg. No work since Lady Day, Hester read it through 3 times. The third time she began to understand what she was holding, and she found that she had to put it down on the table and take her hands off it. It was not a list of debts. There was no money on that page anywhere, no figures at all, no reckoning of any kind. It was simply a list of years and of the people in this parish who, in each of those years, had had the worst of it. Somebody had sat in this kitchen, or in a kitchen very like it at the other end of the village, for Marianne had lived down by the ford, with a lamp and a pen once a year at about this season, and had thought carefully about who in Nether Hembury had had a bad summer, and had then, presumably, gone out with a basket. Hester sat quite still at her kitchen table, with the rain going on the window and the lamp burning at 3 in the afternoon. So it was Marianne. That was the first plain thought that arrived, and it arrived with a curious flattening feeling, the feeling of a candle going out in a room you had liked. It was Marianne all along, and she taught me the bees and told me nothing about this. And she has been dead 21 years, and that is the end of it. But it was not the end of it, and she saw why within about 4 breaths, and sat up straighter. Marianne Tuckfield had died in the January of 1888, and a jar had gone onto the Snook's step the year the barn went, which was 94, and a jar had gone onto Annie Loveridge's step 9 days ago. Hester looked down at the list again. The last line on it was in the year 1887, and after that the page simply stopped, 3 inches of empty paper below it, and the hand that had written it had gone into the ground the following winter. So Marianne had done it for 30 years, and then died. And it had gone on. It had gone on for 21 years, after the woman who started it was in the churchyard. And it had gone on out of a larder that Marianne Tuckfield had never in her life had a key to, because it was Hester's larder in Hester's house that Hester had come to as a bride in 1881. Somebody had taken it up. Somebody had known, had been told, had been shown, had been asked, and had taken it up and had gone on doing it quietly for 21 years, without once mentioning it to the woman whose honey it was. Hester got up and walked the length of the kitchen and back. She was not frightened. She was aware of checking that, again, deliberately, the way you check a bruise to see whether it still hurts, and finding again that there was nothing frightening in it anywhere. What she felt was an extraordinary tenderness, a great warm, inconvenient rush of it, toward a woman she had last seen 21 years ago, in a bed by a window, and toward some entirely unknown person who was very possibly walking about the parish at this moment with a perfectly ordinary face on. She came back to the table and picked up the list again, and it was then, on the 4th reading, standing up with the paper held out to the lamp, that she saw the line she had gone past 3 times without stopping. It was near the bottom. The year was 1884, and the name beside it was Sennick. Hester sat down rather suddenly. 1884. She did the arithmetic and did not need to do it, because she had it already. There are 1 or 2 years in every life that you carry about with you fully assembled and do not have to work out. She had been 25. They had been 3 years married. There had been no clemency yet. Clemency came in the spring of 83. So there had been clemency, a year old, in a drawer by the range because they could not afford a crib and would not ask for one. and the winter of 83 into 84 had been the one when Edwin came off the roof of the linhay. He had not broken anything in the end. That had been the miracle everybody kept mentioning, and Hester had wanted to hit the next person who mentioned it. He had not broken anything. He had torn something in his back, and he had lain on the settle in the kitchen for 11 weeks, unable to stand up straight. And there had been no work and no wage, and no money coming into that house from November until the middle of March, and she had been 25 years old with a baby in a drawer. She remembered it perfectly. She remembered it, she found, with a completeness that rather took her breath. The smell of the liniment, the sound of him trying not to make a sound when he turned over, the exact state of the flower bin in February. She remembered selling her mother's brooch in Taunton and coming home and telling Edwin she had put it away safe. And she remembered it now with the paper in her hand, and she had not thought about it in 25 years. That things had kept arriving. Not much. Never anything large. Nothing that could be pointed at and thanked. A hare hung on the gatepost. A basket of apples. Half a sack of potatoes inside the linhay door with no one about. A dozen eggs, twice. Somebody had come and cut the wood, the whole winter's wood, one Sunday when they were at church, and had left it stacked and had not stayed. Hester had been 25, and desperate, and proud, and had put every one of those things into the house, and been fiercely grateful and profoundly ashamed, and had never got to the bottom of any of it. There had been no way to. That is the entire point of a thing done that way. You cannot give it back, and you cannot say thank you. And so all you can do with it is keep it and go on. And here was her own name, in an old woman's brown ink, in a list she was never meant to see, in a tin box at the back of a cupboard in her own kitchen. 1884, Sennick. And beside it, in that same economical hand, 3 words. His back. Bad. Hester Sennick put the paper down on the table and sat with her hands flat on either side of it and looked at the rain on the window for a long time. The lamp burned. The kettle, which she had put on the hot plate for no reason 20 minutes ago, came to the boil and went on boiling, and eventually she got up and took it off and stood with it in her hand and did not make the tea and put it down on the trivet and sat back down. So it had been Marianne. In the winter of 84, Marianne Tuckfield, who at that time was 60-something and lived down by the ford and had known Hester for 7 years and had not yet handed over the bees, had sat down with a pen and written Sennick on a piece of paper, and had then gone out into the parish and quietly arranged that a young couple at the top of the lane should get through until March. And 4 years later, she had been dying and had sent for Hester and had given her 9 hives. Hester had always understood that. She had understood it for 21 years as an enormous kindness and an enormous compliment, and had done her level best to deserve it, and had thought about it on and off for the whole of her adult life. She had never once understood it as a reply. She sat in her kitchen with the rain going down the window and thought about being 25, and about the wood stacked by the linhay wall on a Sunday, and about an old woman with steel-rimmed spectacles mended with wire saying, "There, now you'll want a smoker of your own." And she found, entirely without warning, and rather to her annoyance, that her eyes had filled. She let them. There was nobody there. She sat at her own table and let it happen, and it did not take very long. and when it had stopped, she got up and blew her nose, and made the tea at last, and drank it, standing at the window, looking out at the wet garden. Then she went and put the spectacles, and the quill, and the hive tool, and the hairpin back into the tin, and closed it. She kept out the notebook. She sat down with it again, and turned to the last written page. HS taking over. Will do very well. And turned over to the first blank one, and looked at it. Then she took her own notebook out of her apron pocket, and laid the two of them side by side on the table. The old one and the new, the same size, the same rubbed corners, the same short columns of years and numbers in two different hands. 53 years of one woman's bees, and 33 of another's, lying together on a scrubbed deal table in the green light of a wet September afternoon. They looked, Hester thought, like one book. She did not write anything in either of them. At about 6, the rain slackened, and at past it stopped, and by 7, there was a long, low band of clear yellow sky in the west under the cloud, and the whole sodden garden began to steam very faintly in the last of the light. Hester put on Edwin's oilskin cape because the grass was soaking, and went down the path. The bees had come out. Not many, and not far, a dozen or so at each entrance, standing about on the alighting boards in the damp, testing the air, deciding. One or two went up over the wall toward the church and the ivy, which would still be dripping and would still be worth going to. They would have the last 4 days of the month, and then October, and if the weather turned, there might be enough after all. Hester went along the row and put her hand on every roof. At the 4th, she stopped. "I found your book," she said. The hum went on under her palm, deep and slow and entirely unbothered. "I found her book, and there's a paper in it, and I'll not tell you what's on it because you'd not care." She stood there in the wet with the cape dripping round her boots. It was her. From the first. And it's been somebody else this 21 year, and I don't know who. And I've been let alone about it all this time. Same as I was let alone in 84. The bees came and went. "And I'll tell you what I never once thought of," said Hester Sennick, "in 15 years of counting that shelf and pretending I wasn't." She took her hand off the roof and looked away down the garden, where the mist was already beginning to lift out of the grass in the low ground beyond the wall, pale and slow, exactly as it had done every evening, for as long as there had been a garden there at all. "I never thought that whoever it is," she said, "might be waiting for me to catch up." October came in clear and cold, and the ivy had 4 good days at the end of September after all. That was the thing Hester remembered afterwards about that autumn. Not the rain, which had seemed at the time to be the whole of it, but the 4 days that came after. Still, bright, blue-skied days with a bite in the morning, and a warmth by noon, and the great cream-green heads of ivy along the church wall and the top of the lane, fairly roaring with bees from 10 until 3. She walked down to look at it on the Sunday after service, and stood in the lane in her good coat for the better part of a quarter of an hour, quite openly, while people went past and said good morning, and understood perfectly well what she was doing. The whole wall was singing. You could hear it from 30 feet. "They'll do," she said aloud to nobody, and went home and got out of her good coat and put the kettle on. They did. She hefted the hives on the 2nd of October and found them heavier than she had any right to expect after 9 days of rain. and she stood at the end of the row with her hands on her hips and something in her chest going loose that she had not entirely known was tight. So then it was the work of the end. There is a particular satisfaction to the last fortnight of a beekeeping year that Hester had never been able to make anybody else understand and had given up trying. It is not the harvest. The harvest is August, and August is heat and hurry and honey up to your elbows. The end of the year is quieter than that and better than that. It is putting things away for the winter and knowing that you have done it well, and knowing that from here until March there is nothing whatever left for you to do but let them alone. She took the feeders off. She put in the mouse guards, narrow strips of perforated zinc across the entrances, so that a field mouse could not get in and spend the winter in the warm, eating the comb, which happens more often than people suppose, and is a disaster when it does. She strapped the roofs down against the gales that would come after Christmas. She cleared the alighting boards and cut back the grass in front of the alcove so the damp would not sit there, and swept the flags. And on the 8th of October, there was the first frost. She knew it before she was properly awake, the particular quality of the light on the ceiling, whiter and harder than the morning had any business being, and the silence outside gone brittle. She came down and opened the back door, and the cold came in past her like something with a purpose. The garden was white, not deep. It was a light frost, the first of dozens. It would be off the grass by 9, but it lay along every leaf and every stem and every spider's web, and it had picked out the whole shape of the place in silver. The flagged path, the dead hollyhock stalks, the wire of the pea frame, the top of the wall. The apple trees had gone bare in the last week and stood up black and complicated against a sky the colour of skimmed milk. Below the wall, the combe was full of mist, level as ever, with the church tower standing out of it. And at the end of the garden, in the stone alcove along the south wall, the 9 hives stood with their roofs whitened, entirely silent, with a bare handful of bees clustered just inside each entrance, where the zinc kept the mice out. Hester Sennick stood in her back doorway in a shawl with her arms folded and looked down at it all for a long time. Then she said, "Right then," and went in and made her tea and thought about what she was going to do. She thought about it, as it turned out, for 4 days. This surprised her. She had rather expected it to be one of those things that arrives finished, that she would wake up one morning knowing and go and do it. But it was not like that. It sat with her through the whole of that week, while she got the last of the apples in and cleaned out the linnet and answered Clemency's letter, and it turned itself over slowly in the back of her mind, the way a problem does when the hands are busy. The question was not what to do. She had known what to do since the wet Thursday in September, when the paper fell out of the book. The question was a much smaller and much more awkward one, and it was this: whether doing it would be, in some fashion she could not quite name, taking something. Because for 15 years, 21 if she counted properly, and she had begun to, somebody had been going down that lane in the early dark with a basket, and Hester had let them. And if she now went down that lane herself with her own basket, then whoever it was would come to the larder, or wherever it was they came to, and find the shelf gone down by 6 jars, and would understand at once what had happened and would very likely stop. And that was the thing she found she could not bear. She turned it over on the Monday while she was picking apples, and on the Tuesday while she was scrubbing out the linhay, and on the Wednesday while she was doing nothing at all, and on the Thursday evening, sitting by the range with the lamp low and the 2 notebooks lying side by side on the table where they had lain for a fortnight. She saw the answer, and it was so simple that she laughed out loud in the empty kitchen. She did not have to take anything. There were 9 hives in that garden. There were 11 dozen jars on that slate shelf, and a great deal of it was heather. And Hester Sennick was 50 years old and in good health, and had a chest of drawers upstairs with rather more in the bottom of it than anybody in Nether Hembury would have guessed. Because a woman who grows most of what she eats and buys a new hat every 4 years accumulates money, whether she means to or not. She did not have to take 6 jars off that shelf. She could put 6 more on it. She went out to the scullery there and then, at 9 o'clock at night with the lamp in her hand, and stood in the doorway of the cold larder, counting the empty jars on the low shelf where the empties lived, and worked out that she had more than enough, and went to bed extremely pleased with herself. She did it on the Saturday. She rose at 4, which was 2 hours before the light, and dressed in the dark, and did not light the lamp downstairs until she had shut the kitchen door, because she had a strong and entirely irrational sense that this was a business to be conducted quietly. Then she went into the cold larder with a candle and took down 6 jars. She chose them with some care, and she was aware, choosing them, that the care was ridiculous and that she was going to take it anyway. Dark ones. The heather off the top of the hill from the 4th hive, the great one, thick enough that you could turn the jar over and count to 3. Because if you are going to give a person honey, you may as well give them the best you have. And because heather honey in October, in a cold house, on bread at the end of a bad year, is not really about honey at all. She wrapped each one in newspaper and folded the ends down and set them in the basket in 2 rows of 3, with a cloth between, so they would not knock. The names she had known for a week. She had not written them down. She had thought about writing them down in the back of her own notebook, on the page after the last year's number, in the way that Marianne had written hers, and had decided against it and could not entirely have said why, except that Marianne's list had been found, eventually, by somebody, and there was a kind of tidiness in leaving nothing to be found. She held them in her head instead. Annie Loveridge, who was up and about and mending, but who had been 3 weeks in bed in the middle of the milking season, and was not going to make that up before Christmas. Old Mr. Snook at the bottom of the lane, who was Wilfred's grandfather, and who had lost the use of his right hand in the spring in a manner nobody discussed, and who had been a hedger for 50 years. The Chidgeys, because there were 8 of them in 4 rooms, and Prudence's father had been laid off from the estate in July when they cut the outdoor staff. Mrs. Vellicott the elder, the schoolmistress's mother, 81 and bedridden since Easter, in a cottage that faced north and never got the sun. The young Percys at the turn of the lane, who had been married in April and had had their first in September, and had it die at 4 days old, and about whom Hester had told the bees on the 12th, with her hand flat on the roof of the 3rd hive, and her voice not quite steady. and Emmeline Gaylard. That last one had taken her some thinking about, because Emmeline had 5 shillings a week from the government and told everybody about it, and would have been outraged past all speech at the suggestion that she needed anything from anyone. But Emmeline was 71, and she had buried her sister in Taunton in August, and had come back on the carrier's cart with her hat on straight, and had not mentioned it since. Not once. Not in 8 weeks. Which for Emmeline Gaylard was a silence you could have heard across the parish. Hester put in the 6th jar and folded the cloth over the top. Then she took the basket on her arm and blew out the candle and let herself out of her own back door at 10 minutes past 5 in the morning. The lane was full of mist. It stood to the height of the hedge banks and further, so that she walked in it as though in a low white room with a ceiling somewhere about the level of the elms. It was cold, but not bitter. Everything dripped. The whole world smelled of wet leaf mould and cold stone and, faintly, from somebody's chimney, of the first coal fire of the season. Nobody was up. That was the great gift of the hour, and Hester had known it would be. In a village of 300 souls, at 5:15 on an October morning, there are perhaps 4 people awake, and every one of them is a mile out with a lantern doing something to a cow. The cottages went past her in the mist, with their windows dark, and their doors shut, and their steps wet, and not one of them so much as had a dog that troubled to bark. She went down the lane and did it. It took her 35 minutes, and she was surprised, afterwards, by how little there was to it. You come to the step. You take the jar out of the basket. You set it down in the corner by the scraper, where the person will see it when they open the door, and where the dog will not knock it, and you push it in tight against the stone so it will not roll. And then you walk away, and you do not look back at the house, and you go on to the next one. That is the whole of it. There is no ceremony in it whatever. There is not even, Hester found, very much feeling in it at the time. You are chiefly occupied with not making a noise, and with keeping the basket from bumping your hip, and it is only afterwards, 1/2 mile up the road in the dark, that it comes and gets you. At the Chidgeys, she had to be careful of the pump handle. At Mrs. Vellacott's, she went round the side, because the front door was never used and had a nail through it. At the Percys, she stood for perhaps 4 seconds longer than was necessary, looking at the dark window with the curtain drawn across it, and then set the jar down and went away, without letting herself think about anything at all. At Emmeline Gaylard's, the last one, at the very bottom of the hill, with Combewell's own chimney invisible in the mist somewhere above and behind, she set the jar in the corner of the step, and then, on an impulse she did not examine, moved it 2 inches so it sat square. Then she stood up and went home in the growing light. The mist began to lift as she came up the last of the hill. It went from white to pearl, and then began to thin from the top, and by the time she came to her own gate, the sky above her was showing a high pale gold that was not quite the sun yet, but was thinking about it. And away below her the whole combe was still full of white, with the church tower standing up out of it, and the first rooks were going over. Her boots were black with wet to the ankle. The basket on her arm was empty. Hester Sennick came in at her own back door at 10 minutes to 6 in the morning, and set the empty basket on the table, and made the tea. And then she sat down at the kitchen table by the window, with both hands round the cup, and it came and got her, exactly as she had known it would, and she sat there for a long while, with her face doing something she was quite glad nobody was there to see. At 7, with the sun properly up and the frost going off the grass, she went down the garden. The hives stood in their alcove in the low gold light, roofs strapped, entrances guarded, the whole row silent and shut and settled. There was one bee out on the front of the 4th hive, standing in the sunshine on the alighting board, moving her forelegs over her head in the way they do, entirely absorbed. Hester went along the row and put her hand on each roof. The wood was cold on top now, but underneath, when she pressed, under her palm, through the strapped-down roof and the crown board and the frames and all the dark, packed layers of it, there was still that deep, faint, continuous warmth. And beneath the warmth, so low you felt it rather than heard it, the winter hum. They were in there, all of them, clustered in a ball the size of a football in the middle of the combs, shivering their flight muscles by the 1,000 to keep the heart of it at 90 degrees, turning slowly from the outside in, so that everybody got a turn in the warm, eating their way steadily up through the stores. They would do that day and night, without pause, without light, for 5 months. Hester stood with her hand on the 4th hive. "I've done it," she said. The hum went on. "6 of them," she said. Annie Loveridge, and old Snook, and the Chidgeys, and Miss Vellacott's mother, and the young Percys at the turn, and Emmeline, and don't you tell her. She moved along the row, hand to hand, roof to roof, the way she had gone along that row on the morning after her wedding, and the morning after her mother's funeral, and the morning after Edwin died, and every single morning in between. "And I'll tell you what else," she said, "the shelf's not short." She had done that first, before the tea and before the sitting down. She had gone into the cold larder with the candle at 6 in the morning, with her boots still wet, and she had counted along the slate, twice, the way she always did, 11 dozen and 4, which was 6 more than she had carried in there in August, and exactly what she had put on the shelf the night before, and exactly what she had written in the back of the little brown notebook by the light of the lamp with the stub of a pencil, sitting at her kitchen table with the rain gone and the frost coming, and her whole life suddenly making a different kind of sense than it had made a fortnight before. She did not know who else would come, or whether they would come at all, or whether they had ever come at all, in any way that a magistrate would recognize. She had stopped requiring an answer somewhere between the Thursday and the Saturday, and she noticed the moment it went, and she did not miss it. What she had instead was better, and it was this, that in the winter of 1884, an old woman had written her name on a piece of paper and told nobody, and that in the autumn of 1909, she had walked down a misty lane at 5 in the morning and set 6 jars on 6 steps and told nobody, and that in between those 2 mornings, there were 25 years in which somebody or several somebodies, or possibly the entire parish of Netherhembury, operating without a single word spoken on the subject, had gone quietly on doing the same thing out of her larder, and never once asked her for the key. She had spent 15 years believing she was the subject of a small mystery. It had taken her until 50 to work out that she had been part of an arrangement. Hester came to the end of the row and stood at the last of the old straw steps, which held nothing but memory, and put her hand on it anyway. "There," she said. "Now you know." The garden lay white and gold around her. The mist in the combe was going. Somewhere down the lane, a door opened, and a bucket was set down on a step, and a voice said something to a dog. Hester Sennick went up the path to the house to get her breakfast, and now the frost is going off the grass, and the kettle is on, and there is nothing left in this story that needs doing. Let the lamp burn low a little longer. Think, if you like, of that cold stone larder, with its rows of amber standing quietly along the slate, pale at one end, dark as a chestnut at the other. Every jar with its little cap of waxed paper and its knot of string, all of them waiting patiently in the dark for somebody who has not needed them yet. Nothing in that room is in any hurry at all. It has all winter. And think of the 9 hives in the stone alcove along the south wall, strapped down against the gales that have not come yet, cold on the outside and warm at the heart, with 40,000 small lives in each of them, turning slowly round and round in the dark, keeping each other warm, humming so low you would have to lay your hand on the wood to know they were there. There is no need to know who carried the jars. There never was. Some things in this world are not questions with answers. They are only kindnesses handed quietly along from one pair of hands to the next over a very long time, by people who would be embarrassed to be thanked for it. So let the mist lie in the combe. Let the frost settle on the orchard and the dead hollyhocks and the top of the wall. Let the house tick and settle around you as it cools. Somewhere out there in the dark, the hives are humming and the shelf is full, and everything that was given away is still there. You may put your light out now. Sleep warm, dear one. Whatever you have given this year, it has not gone anywhere. It is only on a cool stone shelf somewhere, waiting to be needed. Good night.